Well, hello and welcome to Money Control. I'm your host, Nikki Mirchandani, and with me is my senior consulting editor at Money Control, N. Mahalakshmi. We're here to talk about India Inc's reaction post-interim budget. Interim budget was lacking any big bang announcement as expected, but reiterated the government's commitment towards the credible fiscal consolidation measures. But how does India Inc really decode this? Let's get to know more about it. Let's go across first to a very important voice on the show, Vinayak Chattarjee, founder and managing trustee of Infravision Foundation. Morning there.
Good morning. Good morning.
Emin?
Good morning, Vinayak. Obviously, yesterday's hike in capex spend was at the finance minister announced 11%. Some people were a tad disappointed, but in the context of the fact that she has kept the promise on fiscal consolidation, looks like the right thing to do. But from an infrastructure standpoint, what do you think this does to the next year's growth in terms of projects on the ground, execution, looking at election coming in May? What do you think we should reasonably expect in terms of growth?
So let me, it's actually the most relevant question for infrastructure. Let me step back and do some stage setting for you so that we understand the interim budget. Remember that we have a medium-term history of very high allocations. For example, in FY22 budget, the capex increased by 30% from 5 lakh crores to 7.5 lakh crores. That was followed by the FY23 budget, 23-24 budget, where capex increase was even larger. It was 35% growth, taking the budget allocation in the union budget from 7.5 to 10 lakh crores. So you've got a history and a momentum of 30% and 35% growth. Against this, what we have seen in the interim budget is an 11% growth. Now, 11% growth at current prices, if you just factor in cost of various kinds of construction material that's used in infrastructure, let's say that is at 6%, effectively you've got a real increase of 5%. The signaling is very simple. The signaling, and as you would have noticed, the increases in road and rail are reasonably minuscule, practically flat.
Correct.
So the signaling is pretty clear that, guys, we told you this is an interim budget. It's a carry-on budget. It's an arithmetical exercise. It's also to demonstrate great fiscal governance. So there is no fresh thinking. There is no fresh big burst allocations that were either expected or given in this budget. Now, what does this mean? This means that in the full and final budget of that will be presented whenever in June or July, you are going to see a far larger increase in infrastructure spend. And my guess is that the 10 lakh crores or the 11.1 will be taken to 13.5 or 14 lakh crores. You will get at the burst of a new government, you are going to get a 30-35%, and people may not believe this, but even maybe a 40% increase in the allocation for capex. My signal to all your viewers is, don't read too much into the interim budget. You're not meant to read too much into the interim budget. The new government will probably have a fresh view on developments for the next 10 years on the road, rail, port, airport, irrigation, river linking. A whole burst of fresh thinking will emerge. There could be the possibility of a portfolio rejig also among the ministers manning the infrastructure ministries. So there's going to be a burst of fresh thinking with a new government in place. And that will be reflected in very large budgetary allocations in the full and final budget for 24-25. Now, I just want to take the next 1 minute to complete the picture, and then I'll hand it back to you. Remember, from 2014, when this government came into power, it has had a very consistent economic mantra, which is that GDP in this country is going to be turbocharged, boosted, picked up by the bootstraps by massive expenditure on massive public expenditure on infrastructure and capex allocation for infrastructure. And this simple economic mantra has worked well for the government, has worked well for India. And we have seen infrastructure push consistently turbocharge GDP growth. Now, if you, for example, take a view that the allocation for infrastructure is going to remain at 11%, then I'm afraid economists will have to go back to the drawing board, look at the reverse multiplier effects, and actually calculate the extent that it will be a dampener on GDP growth. So the government cannot, my thesis is very simple, the government cannot rest on an 11% growth in infrastructure allocation. Watch this space, watch the tea leaves. Come June, July, you're going to see a 30-35% increase in infra allocation, and that will continue to be the economic mantra for boosting GDP growth in the country. We have got 7% growth. We have got 7.5% GDP growth on the back of 30 and 35% increases in capex, in public expenditure. As some economists are arguing that no, this creates space for private capital to come into infrastructure, I'm sorry, I don't agree in the here and now. It is possible that private capital may come in the medium term, but right now in corporate boardrooms in India and abroad, there is still not very much appetite for putting private capital into greenfield infrastructure projects. So in the foreseeable future, in the medium term, certainly in the next 2 to 3 years, you are going to see GDP growth requiring to be boosted by massive spends in infrastructure. And believe me, you are going to see a 30% in the full budget. And I'll leave you with a small piece of information. In the post-budget interactions last year, Dr. Somnathan made a very interesting comment which has struck with me, which is, he said that the government has a confidential research paper. He did not disclose the authors. He was not required to, but he did share the fact that the government is aware of the fact from that confidential research paper that 1 rupee spent on infrastructure results in 3 rupees of GDP, and 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer translates into 90 paisa of GDP. So the economic thinking is very clear. Massive outlays in infrastructure expenditure in the absence of a significant rise in private spending in capex, which will require complete reformatting of PPP formats, etc. The government honestly will not have much choice in the full budget, but to increase capex by about 30%. So any discussion on this current next 2-3 months interim budget of 11% or sectoral allocation, to my mind, is pretty meaningless, because what the government is signaling is, hang on, don't read too much into this year's infra allocations, wait till the big budget. But I think I've said more than I should have, maybe. So over to you.
Not at all, Vinayak. Very well said, and you have articulated this very beautifully. And this should sound like music to both, people in business as well as stock markets, who probably thought, this year, we shouldn't expect anything more because of elections. And then, so my question to you is here. The way the fiscal math has been worked out in this budget, she's sort of been able to show this path to fiscal consolidation to 4.5% by FY26 only by contracting the entire budget. The total revenue has been brought down, the total expenditure has been brought down to ensure that you are able to, even with reasonable assumptions, you are able to get to that 5.1% number. So if you are saying that you are going to allocate another, 2 lakh crores, you are suggesting 30 to 40%, essentially maintain the spends growth, right?
Crores.
Yeah,
3 lakh crores.
Yeah. So how, will it not come in the way of the fiscal math? That is question number one. And I take your point on this, multiplier effect. Of course, it is, it might be in government confidential papers, but, people who have tracked the industry and the boom from 2003 to 5, all of us know that, infrastructure does create a multiplier effect. But more importantly, private capex has a bigger multiplier effect, which you rightly pointed out is not ready to come. The finance minister has been saying that private capex has to private sector has to step up, but it doesn't happen unless, this global uncertainty goes away or, other things on the ground change. They may not be emboldened. So question number one is, how will the fiscal maths work out if we were to assume that another 40% or 30% has to come in the next budget? That's question number one. And secondly, go on with question number one. I'll ask you the second question.
See, budgets are based on political economy, and it is political correctness at the end of a 10-year term to demonstrate to India, to economists, and to the rest of the world who's watching
Yeah.
that this government is conscious about fiscal prudence and has demonstrated that it can run one of the fastest growing economies of the world with great fiscal prudence. So that point is made, accepted, and full marks for that. Now let's look forward, right? Once you buy the thesis that you have to power economic growth with spends on infrastructure, the question is, what is so sacrosanct about continuing with fiscal prudence at levels of 5.1 and 5.2? If you remember, after COVID or during the period when the economy kind of went into a kind of a downturn because of COVID, most economists argued that there is no hard and fast rule about constantly decreasing fiscal the deficit. The argument is that if productive assets are built and you are not wasting public money, you're not giving freebies, you are not indulging in wasteful expenditure in the budget, you are not indulging in loan melas and write-offs. If productive assets are created in the economy that helps not only boost GDP but helps in the competitiveness of the nation, then nobody minds a higher fiscal deficit. I mean, I would argue that the government should be allowed and encouraged to increase the fiscal deficit to 5.5, 5.6 levels and create the fiscal space to raise infrastructure expenditure by about 30 to 40%, somewhere in between, so that the GDP and the economy gets a massive boost. And believe me, no government in its final year does that, but many governments or most governments in the first year of their 5-year term will take such a bold and aggressive step. So that's my answer for you.
So my question to you again will be, projecting a 5.1% now and taking it to a 5.3% or 2% in the next budget, which is in July. I don't know how the market will take it, and should the finance minister care, will it be playing on her mind? The second question I wish to ask you is this multiplier effect that you talk about. It takes time for that to play out and convert into GDP and tax revenues, right? So immediately your revenue side doesn't change, but you have to contend with the expenditure immediately. So what is your sense of when do we start to see the benefits of spending on infrastructure to flow into the GDP for the finance minister to really take this bold call, if at all she will?
First point, I think the markets will be very happy. When the markets see that infrastructure spend has been projected or refashioned to a 30-35% increase, and the current 11.1 is raised to about 13 or 13.5, the markets will be too happy, because a few decimal points increase in the fiscal deficit is not going to worry the market, worry economists, worry analysts, when they see that it is going into nation building and to productive expenditure. Also, this will boost stock markets, because the extra spend will result in demand for a vast array of goods and services, which will only benefit the share market and people who are investing in infrastructure companies. And I don't think that the finance minister who does this needs to be embarrassed at all by increasing the fiscal deficit by a few decimal points to accommodate a higher infrastructure spend. There need to be no embarrassment, because you're doing it for nation building. So, and your last point that it takes time, believe me, it doesn't take that much time. After all, your 30 and 35% increases in the last 2 years have certainly looked at the performance of steel, cement, various infrastructure commodities, and the infrastructure build out that's happening in the country. It doesn't take very much time. It takes about a few months to convert the cash available into construction and order execution. So, but it is important to do that, because if you're not following this mantra, then I'm asking myself, then what is the economic mantra of the government in the absence of great private sector capex? If you're not following the mantra of massive infrastructure to continue to boost the economy, then what is the alternative mantra that you're following?
Yeah. So, two questions. Which segments of infrastructure do you think are poised for growth? Where would you put your money if this additional 2 lakh crores were to come in, or 3 lakh crores that you said will come in the next budget? What will be the focus areas? That's question number one. Second, how far out is that big bang private capex really? 12 months, 18 months, and what is it really waiting for? Because there is, people used to say next year is going to be election year. There is geopolitical, global uncertainty, US recession may happen, etc. Those are some of the factors. But domestically, is there anything that is holding back private capex?
Look, I'm going to answer your question on private capex is a general question.
Yeah.
Will private sector build new factories, etc.? That's really not my focus. I'm only going to restrict myself to say that my points are only related to private capex in greenfield infrastructure.
Right.
Will domestic and foreign investors, do they have the confidence right now after what happened from 2012 or 2010 to 2013, 14, whatever, the burst of NPAs, the non-level playing field, the criticism about PPPs. So the question really is that, are we seeing any signs that suddenly the confidence has come back in full robustness? Obviously not, because PPP formats are still waiting to be substantially improved. I am aware of the fact that NHAI and Ministry of Road Transport are working on a new BOT format, which is supposed to be more investor friendly. I'm waiting to see the outcome. Railways have got a blank in attracting private capital. There is some private capital, fair amount going into, a little bit into, fair amount in renewable energy and some amount in electricity transmission and distribution related areas. But otherwise, private capex today is not yet ready to invest in greenfield infrastructure. Maximum that's happening is that money is changing hands in existing projects, which is called monetization. But monetization doesn't lead to increased GDP or a new stock of projects. It just, monetization means somebody else is buying somebody else's project.
Yeah.
So the important thing is private capital in infrastructure greenfield projects. And there are still not enough clear signals to the private sector from government that a significant reset is being done to PPP format. So that, therefore, I am not particularly hopeful in the medium term unless something dramatic happens. I've forgotten your first question.
I have also forgotten.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. I just remember. No, I remember. You asked about sectoral allocation.
Yes.
That was your, right? So I'll tell you what, if you look back even 7 or 10 years or 5 years, road capex was here and railway capex was here. Over time, the railways are getting a higher and higher relative share of capex. And that is very much in order, because the national logistics policy of this country and our plans to bring competitiveness in our logistics area means that railway has to carry a far higher share of freight, from 20% today to 48% as the planning of the railways is, for India to achieve both competitiveness in its logistic, as well as to transfer more goods not by road but by rail for climate change reasons, for green reasons. So I would expect a significant reset of the capex from the road sector in favor of the rail sector. I would also feel that when the government is formulating its new thrust, the new government, it would also pay a lot of attention to rural infrastructure, by which I really mean river linking, irrigation, storage, and mandi towns. Finally, India has seen 2.5 decades of intense focus from the mid-90s to now in core infrastructure, transportation, right, energy, all of that. The time has come to start creating frameworks to attract and put in a substantial chunk of money into social infrastructure sector, health and education. The nation has now progressed to having the confidence to now attack those two segments with as much energy and vigor as it did the core infra from the mid-90s onwards. But let me stop there.
Mr. Chattarjee, I'd also want to chat about, though you've just preempted the whole thing by saying that there is nothing much to read about between the lines for the interim budget, and final budget is when we are going to see a bump up typically happening in terms of the allocations given even for the road allocation. That's one point of concern for the investor community across. From what I've been gathering, the awarding activity has been rather slow. NHAI has seen a dip. The balance sheet isn't really very healthy. So how are you looking at this panning out in the election year? That's point number one that I'd like to understand. And what kind of second question that I'd like to understand is, what kind of growth are you really anticipating in the road allocation typically, because it's been a rather flat allocation which has taken place in interim budget. If that's the case, how much do you expect the awarding to go up by?
Look, the road, the problem of reduced orders emanating out of NHAI and MORTH has little to do with the budget. The point there is that the finance ministry had a view that NHAI had reached prudential limits on the amount of debt it was carrying on its book, and it guided NHAI and MORTH to say no more raising debt. But effectively, India's vast amount of road network was built in the last few years by debt. So the fact that debt has been constrained is the reason that order books are falling. Now, there are two ways to attack this. Either you say that I am going to increase the budget allocation substantially because India has still a massive road program ahead of it to complete. For example, there has already been an announcement of the next stage, futuristic stage of the roads program, which is 35,000 kilometers of greenfield controlled expressways, right? So that's a very major program announced, waiting to be executed. So, or you say that I am going to change the BOT PPP format so beautifully that it is going to be wonderfully attractive to domestic and foreign investors to once again jump in and put in balance sheet money into BOT. Either one or both of these can happen. If both happen, we are in clover. That government increases the budget substantially to address the new challenges in the road sector, greenfield controlled access expressways, or it makes the PPP format so attractive that private capital kind of falls over each other to kind of start putting money on building roads again. The latter is still work in progress, and we are yet to see what kind of a new friendly BOT format finally emerges. So let's put that on hold. Assuming it takes 1 year or 1.5 years to settle down, assuming it's very positive, we still have this year to contend. So the government really, and the road construction is one of the sectors which has the highest multiplier effects, right? Far more than transmission, far more than anything else. So it would be prudent for the government, as I said, in the coming budget, in the full budget, to actually address this problem of no more debt for NHAI by saying, guys, while NHAI is putting its house in order and NHAI is making best efforts in TOT and monetization and BOT, etc., let us support the roads program with a far higher allocation for the road sector. And I would bet that that is going to happen.
So Vinayak, you talked about the fact that private sector capex in greenfield projects is not really happening, only because one of the main reasons is that people are still not confident of this BOT PPP framework that we have. What has stopped this from being finalized? I mean, this is if this is really the impediment, this is something the government should have fixed by now.
That is a $1 trillion question. See,
we are putting money on the table. Yeah. Policy should have been, should have been easier to fix.
So hear me out. It is not that policymakers, thinkers, political leaders are unaware of the fact that PPP had kind of fallen off the table. So the recognition came way back in the 2014 first major budget of the new India government. Mr. Jaitley had announced a 500 crore allocation, which all of you in the media have forgotten. Mr. Jaitley's budget of July 2014 had addressed this PPP problem by setting aside a massive 500 crores to create a new institution called 3P India, which was supposed, and 500 crore allocation for a new institution, believe me, is a very substantial commitment. And that new institution was supposed to take a deep dive on existing PPP formats and come up with a revolutionary new formats. Unfortunately, that budget paragraph did not get implemented, and all of you forgot, nobody even raised it. Now, up to 1 year later, in around October, mid of 2015, this government again was seriously considered about the lack of energy in PPP formats, and it set up a very, very high-powered and a very able committee under Dr. Kelkar called the Kelkar Committee. Correct. The Kelkar Committee came up in November 2015 with a brilliant report. If you read it today, you will get a laundry list of all that is supposed to be done to put PPP back on its feet. This is November 2015. But we haven't seen a formal acceptance of that report. We haven't seen debate and discussion on that report. and we are unaware of government's take on the recommendations of the report. In the meantime, PPP has not revived. The railways, in a sense, have faltered on attracting private capital on every initiative, whether it is dedicated freight corridors, station privatization, or running private trains. There has not been great PPP in any other major sector. So I do not have an answer to the question saying as you rightly raised, when everybody knows that there is money waiting outside and in India to put money into India's infrastructure sector, why aren't we putting our heads together and cracking a new set of infrastructure, rules of the game and get all this money in? So I leave it to Moneycontrol to push the agenda.
All right. We'll definitely try to get at least the answers. I don't know whether we can push the agenda. We'll try to. Okay. There is a lot of optimism around power right now, Vinayak. Your thoughts on, where is this sector headed? Do you see spends in power segment accelerating from here on? That's been one of the fastest growing in terms of, overall, if we see.
Power is an umbrella word that encapsulates three links in the chain.
Yeah.
Generation, transmission, and distribution.
Yeah. And right now we are seeing acceleration in everything.
So actually, I am far more optimistic about the power sector than I've been ever before.
Right.
So far as generation is concerned, I think Indian entrepreneurs with backing of foreign funds and partners are putting in a lot of effort and money into renewable power, both in terms of power stations as well as in terms of manufacture of modules and accessories. Government has finally woken up also to take a softer stand on coal thermal. There was a stage a few years back when India joined the fashionable bandwagon to say no more new coal thermal capacity. And everybody said, no, that's not right for us. And finally, the government has come around to the view that in the next few years, India is going to add 15 to 20,000 megawatts of fresh capacity in coal thermal, of course, with all the pollution and climate change safeguards. So I am confident that the generation sector is going to hold, although there is a medium-term concern that because if renewables capacity does not come up as planned, you are going to see a certain phase in the medium term when merchant power rates are going to rise, because there will be an imbalance between demand and supply, but we can discuss that separately. But I don't see generation right now as a major constraint. Transmission, India has one of the finest transmission systems in the world. The only challenge now is that most of the renewable is coming up in remote areas, and the necessary transmission pipes, the lines have to be created with the same speed to be able to evacuate that power. That seems to be the biggest challenge in renewables now. And finally, on distribution, I think a huge degree of measures have been taken that has brought in a sense of fiscal discipline in the discoms. Second licenses are now available for private sector to attempt. The policy framework allows a second licensee, and you're going to see a lot of action there. Government has put in a lot of money into smart metering. Announcements have also been made about time of day pricing, etc. So to cut a long story short, power sector is looking good.
Okay. So if you were to put your money on the fastest growing segments of infrastructure, what is in your what will be your top 5?
Look, I would certainly put my money into the well-run EPC companies, because as India unrolls its infrastructure, we will need the good EPC companies to build that infrastructure. So I would look at the stocks of the well-run EPC companies across the country, and that would be on my list. The issue I would look at people who supply goods and services to the electrical industry: cables, switchgear, insulators, transmission towers, solar modules. Everything that goes into the power generation, transmission, and distribution sector is going to see an uptick. So I would make a list of those companies and carefully scrutinize where I would put my money. So these are the two areas that I would put my money in. And people who make, construction equipment, for example, excavators, bulldozers, earth movers, pavers, people who make construction equipment, those companies are also ones that I would look at. Sure. And obviously, what is called intermediates, issues like steel and cement, which are necessary ingredient to the infrastructure story and are popularly called infrastructure intermediates.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vinayak.
Thank you. Enjoyed the discussion, I must say.
Thank you
And,
so
and
much.
I will have to I'll have to compliment you on your questioning also, because for us, it is as important to have people on the other side, like the two of you, to actually have an intelligent and meaningful conversation. Otherwise, just giving 30-second bite sizes on the budget, frankly, is probably not the best thing to look forward to.
All
But
right.
this has been an interesting conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vinayak.
Thank you.
All right, this is just not the end of the exciting lineup that we have. Coming up next is an equally important voice who tells us about what does this budget really mean for the cement space. Top giant in the industry talking about H.M. Bangur, who is the chairman of Shree Cement, joins us here at Moneycontrol. Morning there.
Morning.
How are you doing? It's been a while that I've seen you here with us, but what do you make out of the budget? Anything that stood out for you in this budget?
Yes, this budget, fortunately, even in the election year, it is a very rational budget. And when it is a rational, infrastructure and the country development is the focus. And for that, cement industry will always be benefited. So I find that lot of infrastructure, housing, the futuristic need of the country is being addressed. So cement will be an important part. Secondly, apart from this, what they are doing is giving a dedicated freight corridor for cement. That is also very important because about 30% cost is transportation cost, and the logistic cost, if saved, will be very helpful. And we are not only spending on this education, which is for future GDP. So I like the budget.
Sure. Mr. Bangur, couple of things. What did you really like in the budget is something that I'm trying to understand and perhaps make some sense of. We've seen the allocations not typically being too high. If you talk about the government support towards the intention of a support scheme to enable the mid-income home buying also, that also is not typically a segment which has gotten a lot of details out there. What really excites you here? No additional expenditure has been allocated yet to the scheme. What are you really drawing out of the budget?
Budget, 2 crore additional homes from the PM will be there. All will be consuming cement. Roads and airports and railway has a big budget. So all the infrastructure will need lot of cement. We are excited about the government capital expenditure. Number one. Number two, if the subsidies are increased, then naturally one way or other, the capital expenditure comes down. This year, the capital expenditure is higher. Interest rates will be coming down because the government borrowings are lower. So there is all the things to be impressed, and it is very interesting and futuristic for the industry. Not only cement, for everyone.
Mahalakshmi here. So through the course of this year, this fiscal, if you were to just give us a number on what kind of volume growth would you expect for cement as an industry, and what kind of pricing potential do we have, pricing headroom do we have for this year?
There are two totally different things. One is volume growth. Volume growth, I feel, should be in the 9 to 10% industry volume growth is expected. And the pricing is totally different. It depends on our cost purpose. And the pricing will always be high in some pockets at some of the time. Because if cement is not reaching there because of the local reasons or another for 1 month or so, some pockets. Otherwise, the price rise will be little less than the inflation. If inflation we expect 6%, then the price rise is expected to be 5.5% over the average of the last year.
Okay, and what do you think will be the biggest drivers in terms of segments? Which segments do you think will be the key drivers for this year?
This year, healthcare budget is good, education is there, tourism is there. Overall, I think industry in general will be better. Rural-based industry, a lot of money is being transferred to uh, fishery, animal husbandry, and by all means, solar power. Solar power means about 10,000 rupees or so is saved per year per household. So rural economy, the industry which is based on rural economy, should be doing much better.
Specifically with respect to cement demand, what segments do you see will be the key drivers?
Indian growth story is intact, so the demand will be there from the housing and from the infrastructure. Infrastructure and housing will be very fine. Industry, we are not very sure how fast the industry will come. Maybe if it is announced today, maybe 1.5 years or so. Next year it will be industry. But government infrastructure is the biggest demand driver.
Okay, and do you expect the real estate traction to continue this year?
It will continue at the same speed at what it was earlier. Nothing big is there. So it is not very exciting because you have already reached a good level. So it will continue.
All right, sir.
All right,
Thank you.
Mr. Bangur, we'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for taking out the time and having this conversation here with us. Pleasure seeing you.
Thank you.
All right, just like we promised, we don't end here. There is another one. There is an exciting lineup like we promised. And to join us here again on the show next, we have Dhaval Ajmera, who is the director, Ajmera Realty and Infra India, here with us. Morning there.
Morning.
How are you doing?
All well. How are you?
All good. How is the interim budget shaped up for you? What was the big bang announcement for you? Anything that excited you? Clearly, the real estate sector seems to be amidst a bit of a bull cycle out there, which seems to be more of the consensus that we're picking up from the brokerage community. What do you pick up from the budget?
Well, I personally feel as there is no direct benefit for real estate, which is okay, but we were expecting a few, but that didn't come. But overall, if you really look, the real estate sector is doing well. There has been a great traction, and real estate is, very much entangled with infrastructure. And we are happy that the government is allocating a 11% increase in their infrastructure budgets towards making better infrastructure all across the country. I think overall, with that movement, with infrastructure moving in, real estate will directly or indirectly start seeing a lot of benefits in terms of demands for homes and other real estate properties.
I have two questions here for you. The first one I'd want to understand is the allocation for smart cities. That's come down by 20%. How much of a percent, essentially, you just operate in 3 regions, if I'm not wrong. How much of that, smart city as a percent of your revenue contribution, highlight that? How does that impact your financials? And overall, what kind of impact do you see of this lower allocation for smart cities overall on the real estate industry put together?
So if you really look at, urban cities, which are primarily more already or partly developed smart cities. So like we operate in Mumbai, Bangalore and Pune. All three have a sub smart city within themselves, or probably something like that. So personally, as us as a company, with this reduction in smart cities budget allocation, we really don't see too much impact coming to our company. But if I have to give a general perspective, I feel every developer now, or any properties which are being developed directly or indirectly in a smart city angle with their specification in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technology, etc. So overall, with urban cities, a reduction in smart city budget will not be having, but yes, definitely new cities which were being developed or are being developed as smart cities, or new townships which are coming up, will probably see a little bit of impact. But I think in urban areas of major cities won't see too much impact.
There's also a proposal per se, or just say the budget also pointed out to the rental housing segment income, perhaps that being a bit of regulation coming in for the rental housing. Do you see that as an opportunity coming in for the real estate industry put together?
Well, it is a very good boost, at least for areas or people where the government is looking to ensure that in Mumbai per se, they want to make it a slum-free Mumbai, and getting those slums into a better housing and a better area to live in with their better living community, and it coming in with good rental schemes or government allocated schemes will actually boost urbanization in every city, and particularly Mumbai. So definitely we are seeing a great boost coming in at least real estate in terms of rental housing. Although the yields per se in residential are lower as compared to commercial, but I think in the overall perspective of schemes, rental housing will be a better boost in tier 2, tier 3 cities also.
Sure.
Sure. Good morning. This is Mahalakshmi. So I wanted to ask you, so far if you see housing demand, most of the demand has only come from luxury housing. So do you see the next layers sort of getting some kind of leg going forward? Do you see this expanding to the affordable segment anytime soon?
So India is on the upward trajectory, and you really see, it's like a pyramid where even if you really look at the taxpayers, it is like the top 3 tax percentage of the taxpayers of overall Indian economy, which is paying the majority of the tax. So I think movement of luxury housing is a good sign in real estate, I would say, because with that movement, that it will percolate down to mid-income and also to affordable housing. Yes, there are certain issues in terms of the definitions of affordable housing, which can actually expand, a better affordable housing coming up in the overall scheme of things in India per se, and specifically in larger cities like Mumbai. If they remove the definition, the angle of 45 lakhs from the affordable housing definition, I think a lot of affordable housing will be start seeing in major cities.
Sure. I also want to understand about the premium and the mid segment has been doing rather well. It's taken the center stage, and this time around also in the interim budget we haven't really seen much coming in for the affordable housing segment. Correct me here, 30 to 40% of your revenue comes from affordable housing segment. Now with a little less focus perhaps being given, at least in the interim budget, do you see the mix changing anytime soon for you? How do you read into the development overall for your business and the industry?
So overall, just to correct you, our majorly revenue is coming from the mid segment. It's very little from affordable housing, but it's more from the mid segment and probably upper mid luxury segment. My personal take, as I said earlier also, affordable housing has a huge potential because in India, there is a great demand for housing and it will continue to happen and rise also. Overall, I feel if there is a tweak in the definition of affordable housing, I think every developer in this country will see a greater income or their revenues, percentage of revenues coming in from the affordable housing segment as compared to probably mid luxury or mid housing segment. So I think overall there is a great demand, and the government should look at probably tweaking this and making it a better boost for the entire real estate economy.
Mr. Ajmera, last question, 30 seconds on this one to squeeze in here. Not really an exciting one. Tata Realty said that no bad news is also good news for the sector. But that being said and laid out there, for the final budget, do you have more expectations that are perhaps you have in mind for the industry? Like you said right at the first go, that there were more expectations that you had in mind which weren't really fulfilled. So what are those? List them out for us.
So very simple, tweaking the affordable housing definition of removing the 45 lakh cap and increasing the interest subsidy scheme or waiver scheme, which is under ATIA for home loans. I think if these two are done, it will be a major boost for the entire real estate sector, and it will also indirectly boost the urban economy.
All right, Mr. Ajmera, we will. ML, would you want to add to it?
That's all. Thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Ajmera, we'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for taking out the time and having this conversation with us. Indeed, a pleasure chatting with you.
The Big Budget Exclusive. In the most comprehensive budget interview, Nirmala Sitharaman takes you beyond the rhetoric and talks about the road ahead. In conversation with News 18 Editor-in-Chief Rahul Joshi. The FM interview, live and exclusive